All right, recording. This is the SIG Auth meeting for March 22nd, 2017. There's not a lot on the agenda, so let's get through that, and then we'll see if there are other topics people want to talk about. We're closing out 1.6. Our SIG doesn't have any flakes or bugs. The release notes are up for review. And I think we have a couple topics to link in to that, so I'm adding those in probably right after this meeting. There's one doc PR that I have open that I know of. I think there are some others for kubeatom that are related to RBAC because kubeatom is enabling RBAC by default. Other than that, I don't know of in-flight changes or release notes or docs that we're waiting on. Does anyone else have things they want to link in? All right. There was a thread on the mailing list. There was some concern about behavior changes between 1.5 and 1.6. I was hoping some of the folks on that thread would jump on the call. I think the takeaway is that authorization is a deployment specific thing. So in 1.5, we have several authorizers that are available, and each deployment gets to pick which one they want to enable by default or which ones they want to enable by default. And if a particular deployment method changes its defaults, then it is responsible for kind of preserving existing permissions or documenting breaking changes. So for example, kubeup changed from defaulting ABAC to defaulting to RBAC. But when upgrading existing clusters, it includes the legacy ABAC policy, so that if you upgrade an existing cluster, your existing cluster keeps working. The change that kubeup needs to document is what happens when you bring up a new cluster, and the answer is service accounts outside the kube system namespace lose permissions by default. And if you want the old behavior back, there's a single command you can run to get the old behavior back. So that's an example of what we want to make sure is documented. Right now, the only deployments I know of that are going to RBAC by default are kubeup and kubeatom. There's discussion about whether kubeatom should consider that a breaking change, given that 1.5 was alpha and they don't support upgrades. So there's debate about that.
With respect to kubeadmin, they are making something like 7 or 8 breaking changes as far as I know. So I'm working with them to make sure those are adequately documented. And yeah, it was alpha. Kubeup was definitely not alpha. Its status is kind of weird, but it's not entirely clear to me that this change is okay for kubeup. Is it all clusters in kubeup, or just certain providers, or?
The ones that we worked with were GCE and GKE. So the other kubeup clusters behave just as they did in 1.5.
And to be clear, GKE also enables ABAC by default.
So GKE is doing the combined. Is that right, CJ?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a reason why we're not doing that for all the other kubeup cases?
Time. Making sure that it worked in one and got it working in one. It's also unclear to me who owns all the kubeup providers.
Yeah, eventually we need to get rid of the kubeups. They're kind of deprecated, but not announced as deprecated. As soon as we get the cloud provider stuff able to run out of tree, we actually need to spend some effort nuking all that stuff. Or,
Yeah.
if there are any bits that need to be saved for GKE or anything else, it needs to be moved out of tree. But breaking existing scripts and things that invoked, or blogs or whatever that invoked kubeup to bring up a cluster is really not okay for the project. I mean, it's super duper painful to go explain that everywhere. If we can make, instead, for someone who's setting up a production cluster, say, look, you just execute this one command or add this one thing saying, yes, I want a secure production cluster that enables appropriate auth or whatever. And that seems like not a huge burden on setting up a production cluster, since that's inherently more challenging with more ops-focused people doing it anyway. But for all the kick the tires kind of use cases, making all those harder is not very desirable. I mean, it's good that we made existing clusters work in a backward compatible way, but a lot of people create clusters as part of automation, or like I said, as part of scripts, or just like copy pasting from blogs and stuff like that. The last time we changed kube control run in a non-backward compatible way, it caused a huge amount of pain. So I'd really rather not go through that again.
If we wanted to, we could fix this by adding the enable legacy ABAC 1.6 only environment variable in kubeup and setting that to true, and documenting that people should change that to false if they want to be more secure.
Does the 1.6 only mean that we'd have this problem again in 1.7?
It means that we called the environment variable that so that we would address it in 1.7 again.
Real quick, maybe a high-level question. So we think that the current security defaults that we have today will be comfortable using for the next couple of years. And then every other security thing that we would add after this has to be opt-in. And we might do one opt-in or more. But
Can whoever's typing please mute? I can't hear what Clayton is saying.
Yeah, I was saying, like, I think, like, Brian, the position you're advocating for is where we are today is the default security posture, and that all new security postures that are potentially back-breaking in an API fashion would have to be opt-in. Do we think that we want to do something like feature by feature? So, like, for now it's RBAC, next it's pod security policy, after that it's, ability to create namespaces or something. Do we think we would probably prefer to define now the default security, or like the default security and a secure profile, or would we do it feature by feature?
I think that would be a good idea.
So if we say the secure profile may break you because we introduce more security, does that, because they're opting in to get more security and they want to be secure, that makes it acceptable?
I think that does make it acceptable. I also think it can be even more acceptable if we outline in advance the things we expect to introduce.
Yeah.
So that if people want to try to be compatible with that from day one, when they opt into the profile, they can. Like, we can say, look, we're going to take away all kinds of host access from pods. We're going to take away cluster admin level permissions from non-kube system namespaces. We're going to enforce all these things. We don't enforce them today, but our intent is like reasonable security practices, and these are the ones we can think of right now.
So I can help write up that list if we want to make the flag that you're talking about be the thing we do in kubeup, and say kubeup secure profile. Here's what secure up means, and here's the things that we will add later in future releases.
Yes, that would be extremely helpful. Yeah, because I definitely, am looking forward to enabling more secure clusters. I do believe people want that. We definitely want it in GKE. For all the kick the tires use cases, which honestly is still the majority of usage, we need to enable that less secure profile.
Okay, I can work with whoever does the flag if that's what we agree on, and I can help write up the description.
Yeah, I guess the three environments that I see, like the kick the tires, the CI environment, and then the intentionally hardened environment. And what we want to make sure is that the CI stuff that's running E2Es is actually testing things in the secured mode. Like that flushed out a lot of cases where we didn't have the right permissions. And so the question is, do you want kubeup kick the tires cases to opt into dev mode, like kubeup -- dev? Not that exactly, but just for instance. Or do you want secured cases to opt into secured? Like which?
The latter.
Okay.
And I think the argument I've heard other people make is the person setting this up is usually doing this into some context where they probably have some control. So if you're setting up on GCE, you probably have default firewall rules, and the only credentials to the cluster are what come back as part of KubeUp. And so you're at a reasonable level of security, and every step after that where you allow someone else to access it, you're adding extra people.
I would also be in favor of adding a message to KubeUp to emit a warning saying, you're starting in insecure developer mode. If you want to lock down, please do this, and here's a link to the documentation that explains what the implications are.
Okay, and then changing all the CI jobs to start up in secure mode so we can make sure we work that way.
And arguably, we should be testing both modes. But if we think right now that's too expensive or too hard to set up, and we care more about the secure mode.
Some of the features won't work if you let all service accounts be cluster admins, right? Like you can't. Some of the tests that make sure you can subdivide namespaces, well, you can't if all service accounts are cluster admins.
Yeah, I mean, those tests should only be run in the secure profile. I don't think this is the only case where you have tests that don't run in all scenarios, right? Like tests of alpha features shouldn't work by default.
Yeah, I think like we're adding effectively, and this has been discussed a little bit in the conformance stuff, like we're basically adding 2 security profiles minimum, and it probably makes sense that we will have to go pay the cost to separate out the tests. And like in OpenShift, we've actually hit a lot of we spent most of the time saying like this cube test doesn't run because it assumes that it can schedule to all nodes. Scheduling to all nodes is not allowed by default, or whatever the specific.
Yeah, I think we should expect to have other profiles as well. Like I'd like to see an alpha profile and a production profile that doesn't allow experimental features. Right, and then just run all the alpha tests in the alpha profile. I think this is a win actually as well, because then we can advertise that we introduced a secure profile for production clusters who want to run secure, a hardened profile or whatever, and then we can advertise it as a feature instead of saying, look, we're making it harder for everybody who doesn't care about this.
Well, I mean, you wouldn't advertise it that way if you don't want KubeUp to live forever, right? I mean, you said you wanted to remove KubeUp at some point. It doesn't seem like we want to encourage it.
I do want to remove KubeUp, but KubeUp is going to need some kind of replacement. And yeah, I don't know how much we want to advertise any KubeUp specific thing, but the concept of a secure profile is going to need to exist in the conformance testing. It's going to need to exist in whatever the KubeUp replacement is. It's going to need to persist beyond KubeUp.
So what do we think our action item for unblocking 1.6 release is?
The minimal action item is to make KubeUp behavior backward compatible with what it was in 1.5 by default. If we also want to make it easier to impose a more lockdown security profile, then we would also have to add that. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. I don't know what it does to tests. We can flip a flag and we can check that in.
Yeah, I mean, we can enable, if the first thing we want to do is go enable the secure profile in all the tests, I'm fine with that.
So yeah, we could change the flag default in config default, but keep it at what it is today in config test so that we continue to test what we're testing, but the thing that we release is the old legacy mode.
Yes.
I wouldn't even call it legacy. It's developer mode or insecure mode or
Sure.
something.
Yeah, exactly.
But today that only flips one thing. That's just the is ABAC on also.
Right.
And then we can work on defining that better in the 1.7 cycle.
That sounds good to me.
If the flag just turns on ABAC, is that backwards compatible, or does the old behavior allow all?
No, old behavior was an ABAC policy that essentially allowed all to all service accounts.
Okay.
Yeah, and can we also flesh out this change in the release notes? I did a quick skim, and there was like a one-line PR title or something about kubeadmin that didn't even mention RBAC, and I didn't see anything about kubeup. So we definitely need to improve the release note coverage for this. Can someone take that action item, please?
Yes.
Do we document kubeup somewhere?
And the kubeup stuff is part of the release bundle, is it not? It used to be. So, I mean, it seems like it needs to be covered by the release notes, even though it is, one of many release tools that, like kubeadmin, is part of the release bundle. Last time I checked. In CJ, we totally own the GKE part of kubeup as far as I'm concerned. So as long as you're comfortable with whatever we're doing there, that's fine, because we manage the rollouts for the users. So I would just assume that we could do something special if we need to. But for anything that someone just downloading the release bundle or pulling from GitHub is doing, we need to retain that backward compatibility. So I'll just say I appreciate your flexibility, and I know this was discussed in various threads all the way back in January and maybe earlier. I saw Tim had responded to the thread that I then found and responded to, but there was no follow-up. I just plead with people, if you can think about how to communicate some of these things to the broader community, that would help. This isn't the only issue that has come up today. Just to let you know, it's like one of three at least. Finding about these things on the day we're supposed to cut the release is not awesome. So if you can just help brainstorm ways to get better coverage of these, like I said, I didn't really see anything clear in the features repo. I didn't see anything clear in the release notes. I didn't see anything clear in the one documentation PR I could find about what was going on.
I think the disconnect is probably between like the RBAC feature itself, existed in 1.5, and anyone who's using it in 1.5 is forward compatible to 1.6.
And it was alpha before too, right? So yeah. So
but even that's forward compatible, so that's nice, but wasn't necessary. But in particular deployments, switching default authorizers, and so the disconnect is probably like the RBAC feature itself is completely compatible with 1.5, but the deployment methods changing is where like it affects users. And so it's a new deployment, quote unquote new deployment method like kubeadm. If it's enabling RBAC and everyone is using a new cluster, then okay, you get a secured cluster with kubeadm. Kubeup, people, like you said, already have scripts and examples and blogs and things. So we did a lot of work to make sure an upgraded cluster didn't change behavior, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks a lot. Is there anything else regarding this specific issue? If not, I have other fires I need to go stamp out.
I don't think so.
All right.
I will look at the release notes. CJ, do you want to do something for the profile?
Yeah, I'll take on flipping that on and seeing what breaks and fixing that.
Okay. We probably want to brainstorm for at least a minute about like what profiles are likely to do. Clayton, you said you were going to write that up, because I think we'll have at least 3, like the development or insecure one, a secured single tenant one, and then a secured multi-tenant one eventually. And so kind of thinking about
that makes sense to me. Clayton had pointed me at a tenancy profile cluster, a doc or something like that, as people trying to define what multi-tenancy means.
Yeah.
So, yeah, at least those 3 that you mentioned sound like a reasonable starting point if we need to introduce more profiles or potentially, well, I mean, yeah, changing existing ones again becomes tricky, but once we introduce them.
Yeah, and documenting like aspirationally, like this is what we are intending to do. Here's what the controls we have in place today. Here's the controls we don't have in place. But when we get the controls in place, we would lock it down this way, like opt into what you want.
That would be good.
Tricky.
And I think what do we intend the profile to do? I think that would be useful to go through the proposal process, just so people can call out, no, we actually need to also block access to this, that, and the other thing for this use case. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think aspirational ones are going to be really tough because it will break people who didn't realize what they were opting into or didn't read it carefully enough.
Yeah, so let's do our best and think about how we can make it better. Maybe we can provide client-side validation or other things.
Okay.
All right, if something else pops up, please notify me by some means other than GitHub notifications, because those go to DevNull.
Yep. All right, thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
And with someone from, I guess this didn't impact KubeAtom nearly as much, but the idea about security profiles is something we will at least want to discuss with the various deployment methods. Like I think that's a useful construct to have, especially when you start having like 3, 4, 5 different ways of deploying Kube. If you can say, well, I want this profile, and then each deployment does it in its own way, that might be a useful way to kind of communicate what type of cluster are you setting up here, no matter whether you're using COPS or KubeAtom or KubeUp.
Do we then end up having to worry about, like, this is what it was in 1.6, and I want the secure profile I got in 1.6 running in 1.7?
Yeah.
I worry about the creep there.
Yep.
So even the more secure one that you could get in 1.7, no, I don't want that. I want the way I ran it in 1.6.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, you have like all the underlying options and all the setup that you can do. And if you expose all of that to the user, then they can fiddle with every knob and say, well, I want this and that and this and that. On the other hand, you have the really high level, like I want secure and not secure, and the meaning of secure changes release to release as we get more controls. I'm not sure. Clayton, do you have thoughts on that? No thoughts.
I think there's another landmine here too. Like, if we let people be insecure by default, essentially, then they could essentially end up building their production infrastructure, in that mode, and then decide, okay, now I want it to be secure, and it's going to be so incredibly complex to move it. Like once it's been built like that, then if you want to try and flip it into secure mode, it'll be basically impossible at that point, and so they'll just give up.
That
so
will happen.
They'll just end up running their production in insecure mode because it's too hard.
That is
I envision
absolutely what will happen.
It is also really likely that we will never get demos or examples that actually work with security on, as long as you have the security's off and it's easy and let's play with it, as opposed to trying to make the secured as easy as possible.
It's very disheartening.
Because I would much rather have a motivation that says we need to make security just work in the vast majority of cases, and make it really easy to see what's happening and to make it do what you want, as opposed to, well, we can't turn security on because nothing works.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think if we go down this path of like these separate profiles that will inevitably kind of operate in this way, then maybe there needs to be some sort of stick to get people, like, I understand the kick the tires, we want that to be frictionless and as easy as possible, but maybe once you hit some sort of threshold, like, oh, you've put more than X number of nodes into this or something along these lines, that you start getting warnings about.
Not even that. I think the stick. I think it would be anything that is in tree, like all the add-ons that we have in tree, have to run in secure mode, right? And anything that's in the Kubernetes org or linked to by us, like the things we sort of adopt and recommend, like we're not going to recommend something that requires you to start up in insecure mode. So in my mind, that would be a division. It's still not terrific, but.
So how do we, for lack of a better term, shame the deployment things that don't work in secure mode? Because that's kind of what we're fighting against now, is people have built these things that are not going to work if you run with only RBAC on, because they didn't include a RBAC role binding with it.
Well, I mean, whoever's deploying it can always give the thing permission out of band, right? It doesn't require whoever wrote the add-on to change their add-on. If I want to run an add-on that requires permissions, I can grant those permissions and then deploy the add-on, right?
Sure.
And so it doesn't have to be on them, but ideally, things that want to run on your cluster would describe the permissions they need. I don't know how to motivate that.
Yeah, I mean, for kind of big security changes I've rolled out in the past, it's sort of been like, you introduce it as an optional thing, and then you set a timetable, and you try and start communicating, and then you then have a very, very lightweight kind of exemption, like, oh, I want to get out. This got flipped to default. I need to get myself out of this situation and back to working. And then you gradually beat down on the whitelisting. I don't actually really know what that means.
And I thought that's what we had, right? Like KubeUp starts secured. If you want to get back to insecure, you're one command away from making every service account a cluster admin. Like that, I don't know how to get any closer to that.
Yeah, and I think we all had different expectations of what the right thing was there than people outside of SIG Auth, because I agree with you, Jordan, but others do not.
I mean, even as simple as like which profile is the default. Like, do you default to insecure? That seems like a really bad default. I know I've seen sort of servers that go both ways, where you have to opt into development mode. So I think Vault, you have to start up and specify that you want development mode, and it opens itself up and does all sorts of things. STD, I think, goes the other way. So by default, it runs not with TLS enabled, or at least in V2 it did. I'm not sure about V3. So I've seen it both ways. I like making someone tell you, yep, I'm in development mode. I don't care. Just let me kick the tires. Like, that's a valid use case, but I want to know that they realize that that's the profile they're in.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree there. I think, like, if someone's definitely telling you, "Oh, I know I'm in development mode," that's preferable security wise. But yeah.
But apparently, to stay compatible with legacy KubeUp, we are stuck defaulting to insecure forever. I don't know. maybe the answer is kubeup goes away and whatever replaces it makes you specify.
I mean, it's not going to be though that like, it's not going to be like we enable one feature and then you do that one-time switch and suddenly you're compatible with secure though. It's going to be, you know, RBAC is next, pod security policy is next.
Right, but even the indication that like what I want is a development cluster, not a secure cluster. Like even making people opt into that, right?
Yeah, but I think that even those developer clusters could be, you know, in other people's terms where they're not necessarily running multi-tenant clusters or that kind of thing could be somebody's production system pretty quickly. I don't know.
Okay, so our action items for today. I like the idea of the security profile thing, but I think it's going to get us in trouble if we anticipate changing what those profiles mean release to release. I don't see how we do that and not break people again.
We could just carry a snapshot of each configuration, whatever it looks like. So once we get done with the 1.6 cycle, we snapshot it and we start changing our secure defaults for 1.7, but the 1.6 ones stay.
But then what do you use as the default? Like the point is you have blog posts and examples and scripts that are just calling kubeup. Would you make them, it becomes another API version essentially, right? Like I want the 1.6 kubeup behavior.
Yeah, and then we have test explosions if we're expecting to actually support all those.
Right.
Yeah. I don't think there's any good answers right now. Maybe our action item is to think about what we need to do for 1.7.
Yeah, it seems like it would be hard pressed for us to come up with a solution for this for the 1.6 release that's now past due.
It seems like the hard sticking point for a lot of people is that kubeup changed behavior. We can change that back. It was super useful that kubeup changed behavior and we were able to run tests on our back. But now that we're there, I guess we can flip it back.
I don't want to stop running tests with the secured profile, so I don't want to lose that coverage.
Yeah, I think my plan there
All right.
was to make the kubeup script default to old mode, but have the test scripts default to what we've been running for the last 3 months. RBAC only.
All right. So I assume we'll grab like a few people and work on this afternoon. CJ, me, I think Clayton. Anyone else want to be involved?
Yeah, I'll work with CJ.
Who is that? Sorry.
Jacob.
Jacob. Okay. All right. Well, great. If no one has anything else, oh, go ahead.
Maybe since we're wrapping up, I might actually introduce myself. So I'm Greg Castle. I just started on the Kubernetes team. I'm a security engineer and transferred from elsewhere within Google. And so you'll see me kind of popping up in various security-related things. So yeah.
Well, welcome. Welcome to the group where half the people are angry at you all the time because you're insecure or you're too secure.
It's usually not this bad.
All right. Well, if no one has anything else, I think we'll call that a meeting and we'll get going on the 1.6 stuff. Try to get that unblocked. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jordan.
Yeah.
Bye.